Yeah, please go ahead and start.
Yeah. Rajesh sir, you can start the session.
So how many students are there? Many
Now
students.
168, and it
Okay.
is increasing. Yeah, yeah, it is
In
100. Yeah, nearby 200 now. So all the students are coming now.
Mhm. So, dear students, I am glad to introduce Dr. Shalini Jani Madam as a part of our expert lecture series on environmental studies. She is a senior scientist working with Water Technology and Management Division in National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, Nagpur. She has more than 15 years of research experience on conservation and management of ecosystems and biodiversity across India. She has completed her PhD in forestry in year 2010 from Forest Research Institute, India. In her research career, she has many achievements and she served as a member in many committees. I list out a few of her achievements. Since 2017, she is South Asia Regional Chair for IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management. Since 2018, she is IPBES lead author for Global Thematic Assessment on Sustainable Use of Wild Species. She has been promoting mainstreaming of nature-based solution for reducing disaster risk and enhancing climate resilience. Her model of uh, fodder bank in Western Himalayas was among 10 best case studies of SAARC countries for sustainable forest management in mountains. She was awarded first IUCN CEM Chair Young Professional Award at World uh, Congress in 2014 for her research on forests of Indian Himalayan region. She was selected among 100 women for their exceptional work in Asia by Asian Rural Women's Coalition. She has more than 40 peer-reviewed publications to her credit. She is passionate about science outreach and has delivered many talks to popularize the importance of ecosystem and nature-based solution across Asia. Please, madam, you can start, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh, Dr. Sabir, and Dr. Param Shivam for having me here on the virtual platform. And this is indeed a privilege to interact with the students of your university, and that too on a very important topic. I'm sure we all are having a very tough time for last few months when the entire humanity is having a new kind of experience, and it is said that we are now living in new normal where virtual reality is the actual reality, whereas meeting people is a kind of threat to our survival. So I'm sure you all are also taking precautions to be safe from this pandemic, at the same time getting educated. And the plus point of this new reality is you are getting to know, you are getting to listen to experts who are sitting very far away from you. And it would have been a different thing if you would have invited me in the previous time, when I would have seen my schedule and seen if I can travel to your state and be part of your campus audience. But see, in this reality, we are facing each other in a very small span of time, and I can meet and share my thoughts with a larger audience sitting along with me. So without much further delay, let me know if my slides are visible to you and I'm clearly audible. In case you feel that I'm not clearly audible, to let me know. I'm sharing my screen. I hope it's clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So the talk today is about biodiversity, what biodiversity is, what kind of contribution and why actually we need biodiversity around us, what is so much important that we need to actually discuss it in one of the lectures and need to understand. I have been told that most of you are from engineering background, and to understand biodiversity, this is a new way you are trying to see it, because I'm sure for you till now biodiversity would have been seeing nature on your road ends or your parks or the places if you visit sometime in a week or day to relax your mind, unwind yourself, and come out of the stress caused because of your studies or anything else. I'll also be talking about reducing degradation, because we all know because of development and rampant loss of resources and natural resources around us, the biodiversity is degrading very fast. So I'm Shalini, as I've been told, and I wear three important hats. I'm senior scientist with CSIR NIRI. I'm leading IUCN Commission on Ecosystems Management. So we also work on ecosystems, and this has been for last almost a decade or so that I'm involved with Commission on Ecosystems Management. I have been part of IBIS as a lead author for Asia Pacific Assessment on Values of Biodiversity, and now for last 3 years I'm involved with Sustainable Use Assessment that will be out sometime in 2022. So there is already a lot of brainstorming happening on the importance of biodiversity and why we need to understand, be you are an engineering student or business community or a local stakeholder or policy maker or an urban planner, you need to understand the importance of biodiversity and how to reduce and halt the degradation around us. The context of this presentation is why we need to understand ecosystems, biodiversity, and why nature should matter for us. The second important context will be what are the strategies for managing the uncertainties, the deforestation, destruction of biodiversity and ecosystems in Anthropocene. I'm sure we all understand that we live in a new era, new age that is called as Anthropocene, because our entire world, our nature has been modified because of human interventions. Before I go ahead and tell you about what biodiversity is, what ecosystems are, I would like to show you this reality of this year when we all know that in 2019 already in November sometime, the pandemic started in Wuhan province of China. And this came very much in India, and the lockdown was imposed sometime in March. It was declared a WHO pandemic sometime in February. So there was a huge threat to our survival because of this very, very small virus. And as if this virus was not enough to shake the entire humanity and the global and the national calamities, we had this cyclone Amphan that hit our east coast sometime in I think in May. So the cyclone Amphan badly affected Kolkata and Sundarbans, and then later on sometime in June first week, we have this another storm and cyclone coming on the west coast of India that affected Mumbai in a significant way. And in between this entire crisis, there was this locust attack happening in different states of India and affecting our agriculture, our agrarian economy. So if you see, this entire year has been very interesting and at the same time very threatening situation for humanity. At the same time, there were some interesting pictures. Many of you who are using social media, I'm sure many of you have these social media accounts, and these pictures were very commonly floating sometime in April and May, not only in India but across the world, that now there are increased wildlife sightings in this lockdown period. So this was basically the time for nature when the animals were coming out and not able to understand why the outside world has become suddenly silent. So there was the need to understand that it is high time we need to acknowledge nature and nature's benefit to support our survival. Those who have read a little bit might be knowing that viruses and zoonotic diseases only escape nature and come out with the human being when they are affected. I'm sure you know that Wuhan was the place from the wet fish markets, this virus came out and affected the entire world. So it's very important to understand that there is a huge role that biodiversity has to play. there's the huge role that ecosystems have to play, and only restoration and reducing degradation can help our existence. It's not like we are going to help nature, it is how nature will help us for our survival. And while this entire pandemic was happening, there was this sudden urge of using Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine or naturopathy to build up our immunity. There was, I mean, if you even talk about Arogya Setu or government initiative, Kadha, Chavanprash, and so many other these decoctions were there in the market, Giloy tablets and all those things that were really helping you to boost your immunity. So where was it all coming from? So basically, this was all nature's support. This was all biodiversity that you were using to build up your immunity. But at the same time, it's also important to note that such a huge population of the country and the entire world, are our natural resources actually sufficient to fulfill our demand? So there was huge pressure on these plants as well during this period. And this is another picture from Madagascar and China, where apart from allopathic medicines, a lot of other medicines like Artemisia and a lot of other medicines were used as a natural medicine to boost the immunity and build up the immunity against the virus. There is one of this message that I would like to share by the UN, one of the chairs, that 2020 is going to be the year for urgency, the year for ambition, and year for action to address the crisis that is facing nature. It is also an opportunity to more fully incorporate nature-based solutions into global climate action. This lady has also been one of the DGs for IUCN, Dr. Inger Anderson, and this thought that she shared, I think, is very, very relevant at the present time. So if I start telling you what nature is, what biodiversity is, so it all starts right from the plate, from the food that we are eating, the food we eat, the air we breathe, or the kind of pure water that we are drinking, and the climate and the microclimate we live in. It all comes from nature and biodiversity. And this is the exceptional time we live. If we want to care for ourselves, we need to care for nature. So it's time when we need to build back better. So with this this current thoughts in mind, to tell you how important it is to understand nature and biodiversity, I would formally start my actual lecture from here. But this is to let you know that your role as a student, your role as an important stakeholder in biodiversity and ecosystem conservation is very, very important. Hence, very important it is that while you study your environmental and engineering and business and law aspects, you also try to understand how important it is to conserve, save, restore, and protect nature around you. Now, biodiversity has a huge degree of relevance. I'm showing you this one important picture that shows these are the important planetary boundaries that we talk about. So these planetary boundaries are climate change, ocean acidification, ozone layer depletion, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, global trans water use, change in land use, biodiversity loss. So these are important planetary boundaries. But because of rampant development in last few decades, post your industrial revolution, that has been achieved mostly at the expense of ecological and ecosystem degradation. These are four important planetary boundaries that have been exceeded. So the threshold has already surpassed, and these thresholds were for climate change, loss of biological and biospheric integrity, land use, land cover changes, alteration in biogeochemical cycle because of phosphorus and nitrogen. And I'm sure you understand how this has happened. If you see your agriculture, there is a huge use of chemicals. If you see your wastewater, a lot of chemical is coming out. There is a rampant change in land use system. So with this entire background, the extinction of species is very, very rapid, very, very fast. Now, why we need to actually consider biodiversity? I gave you some of the basic previous slide where I was telling about how pandemic has a huge connection with nature and biodiversity loss. At the same time, biodiversity is one of the cross-cutting themes. You talk about disaster risk, you talk about climate change, you talk about sustainable development goals, you talk about anything, the only way and the cross-cutting theme is biodiversity. Unless we protect biodiversity, we are not able to address the Paris COP promises or reducing climate change or achieving sustainable development goals or disaster risk reduction. So if we want to address any international agendas or promises, we very well need to consider actually the importance of biodiversity. So in totality, if I say that we are actually very much dependent on biodiversity and we are dependent on our survival. So, I mean, if we talk about food production, fodder production, flood protection, recreation, microclimate, shelter, beauty, tourism, carbon sink, pollination, timber production, I mean, whatever we need, it comes from biodiversity. And these are called as ecosystem services. So there are different ecosystem services that are depicted in this slide. There are provisioning services, there are regulating services, there are supporting services, and there are recreational benefits as well. This is a very important slide that I would like to show you. I am sure many of you, the students who are sitting here, might be aware or might not be aware that in 2015, Sustainable Development Goals were decided by UN. And these goals are to be realized and achieved by 2030. And if we just break down all these goals, we find there are actually 4 important biospheric goals. And unless we address these biospheric goals like life on land, life below water, climate action, and fresh water, we are not going to have a sustainable society. And unless we have a sustainable society, we will not have economic benefit. Unless we have economic benefit, there will be no peace in the world. So this is the need, this is the importance of biosphere and biodiversity. And unless we get the provisioning, regulating, and cultural services, we will not be able to achieve human well-being. So when I call human well-being, what is human well-being? It's sustainable development, it's human development index, there's genuine progress indicator, and gross national happiness. You might be aware that Bhutan is one of the happiest nations in the world, and at the same time, it's carbon neutral. That means it doesn't have any loss to biodiversity that results in greenhouse gas emission. So there's a huge importance of biodiversity that is clearly linked to your local survival, your well-being, and the economic benefit and the peace in the world. So the basic underlying thing is that we are slowly realizing, our policymakers, our government are realizing, but still ignoring the fact that nature, biodiversity, and ecosystem, they do matter for us. And there is a proven potential that is required for human well-being. So biodiversity, when I say the word biodiversity, bio means bio, life, and the life, and diversity is like variability. So this variability can be in form, in shape, in any way. So right from genetic diversity to morphological diversity, it's a complex term. So biodiversity is notoriously difficult to define. And even if you see the web of life, those who know web of life or food chain or food web, they know how complex it is. And in this complexity lives biodiversity. Biodiversity at all levels. It can be at ecosystem level, at genetic level, at species level. And there has been so many unresolved questions and definitions about biological diversity. If I talk about a lot of students sitting here in this lecture, I know, and I'm sure you all understand that you look different from each other, though at the same time you have the same chromosome numbers, you have the same kind of anatomy. So that shows that there are certain similarities, but at the same time there are certain dissimilarities as well. So this is what biodiversity in general is. This is a very basic slide that you might have been seeing right from the very starting. Now even very basic level students, they read it when they are in first, second, or third standard, what food chain is, what food web is. So the idea of showing you this slide is to make you understand that there is this complexity, that there is this diversity that makes everything diverse from each other. So this is what biodiversity looks like. So it can be in forms, it can be in life, in levels, it can be in different combinations, a variety of genes. So if there is a genetic difference, obviously we know that with the genetic difference, an ape and a human being are different. Then there are difference in species, different in habitats. Aquatic habitat is different from a terrestrial habitat, then a mountain habitat, then a marine habitat. And there is these different ecosystems, mountain, forest, urban ecosystems, so on and so forth. So now telling you the importance of biodiversity, there are the huge interactions, socio-ecological interactions of biodiversity that are important. They keep us healthy. More than 50% of our synthesized medicines are coming from nature. From where? From biodiversity. 80% of our global population relies on traditional medicines. From where they are coming? They are coming from nature, from biodiversity. So some of the examples here that I am showing are this one interesting example of starfish skin. And the mucus from starfish skin is used to treat asthma. Then there is this important poppy or opium plant from where opium is also produced. Morphine is also produced, that is used as an important agent of most of the medicines so that they can be effective and they can affect you in a very fast manner and you can treat your different kind of ailments. And there is a very important, this cone snail. Maybe those who are living in the coastal areas might have seen the different kind of snails. We in urban areas find these small snails in our garden. But there are a lot of importance of these unique threatened biodiversity, like cone snail gives us venom toxin, and there is this a registered painkiller tablet that is 1000 times more potent than even morphine comes from this cone snail. Now you might have heard about hibernating bears. A lot of animals hibernate during winter because they are cold-blooded and they are not very much adapted to this environment. So an extract from bear blood restores bone quality and it is used against osteoporosis. So these are some of the examples just to let you know that how important is biodiversity around you. Not only a lot of medicines, I'm sure you have heard or your teachers might tell you sometime that when tsunami came in India in sometime in 2001, there was a reduced impact of tsunami because of very strengthened coastal mangroves in our coastal belt. So mangroves are one type of biodiversity, nature's buffer zones that help us to reduce disaster risk. So protecting coastline, and that is why our country's coastal zone have a coastal zone regulation act that says that we cannot have intensive development and industrial activities in the coastal zone of the country because these are very sensitive and they are very important. They are very important carbon sink also. We call this carbon as blue carbon, and this carbon actually helps us to reduce different kinds of cyclones or tsunamis or storms, that they reduce their intensity. I'll just give you one example that when Amphan hit this year in May, there was almost 150 kilometers per hour of cyclone speed reduced just because of this intact mangroves in Sundarban Delta. So that is the importance of mangroves. We also know that there are a lot of bacteria and microorganisms that are used to reduce hazardous waste from oil spill. They also convert a lot of toxic material into water and harmless gases. I'll give you a very interesting example of one of the microbes, that is Pseudomonas putida. I'm sure being engineering students you might have not heard, but Pseudomonas is very important genus of microbes that has the capacity to convert toxic material into untoxic or intoxic material. So Pseudomonas putida actually cleans oil spills if they are spilled in oceans and reduces their toxic capability to affect microorganisms or animals or mangroves of the area. It is not only medicinal or food or fodder or a lot of disastrous risk reduction affairs, but it is also a huge source of inspiration. Nature inspires us. Many of you might have read, or we also know that when we want to write or we want to get healthy very fast, we get in the lap of nature. That's why we plan these holidays to go amid some quiet part of nature so that we feel inspired, we feel relaxed, we feel rejuvenated, we feel back in energy. So there is this some examples, like one of the example of Velcro. Velcro is one of the game-changing products that science has developed. You use them in shoes, in your bags, in your attires. So this was actually developed by inspiration from nature. So there is one this important plant that is used for and that is actually having this kind of tricks, and this gave actually the inspiration that is one of the most important inventions of 20th century. Then here is this another beetle picture that you can show that you can see Stenocara beetle, and this beetle is found in Namibia desert, that are one of the very harsh deserts in Southwest Africa and one of the very dry parts of the earth. So these are beetles, they collect frog droplets on their bumpy wings and funnel these droplets into their mouth. So this becomes a very important source of fresh water. And from these creatures, humans have learned how to better ways to collect water, which may mean the difference between life and death, especially for people living in extreme environments, how they can use the small amount of water for their better prospects. Sorry. Then here is one of the examples. Those of you who have traveled inside forest might have seen these important termite nets, termite hills. And these termite hills are very important because they are also one of the biggest biological indicators. There are a lot of biological indicator species that tell you that if the area is pristine, undisturbed, or encroached by human intervention. So if there are a lot of human interventions, you might not see a lot of termite hills in your vicinity. So these termite hills in Zimbabwe have been taken as an inspiration for green architecture. The East Case Center, this is one of the buildings in Zimbabwe that was designed to naturally ventilate and cool, and this was basically modeled on termite mound. There is a huge interest in the world to develop green buildings, buildings that do not require a lot of ACs, that do not require a lot of artificial ventilation, but natural ventilation. So this is called as green architecture, and this is one of the building example. You might also be aware that ultrasonic echoes are actually inspired by bats, and these are used to offer spatial awareness to a lot of vision impaired patients. So these I want to show you because you all come from the diverse background, that what are the importance of biodiversity around us. And just for your interesting, tell you something interesting about this picture. These pictures are of some honeybee and bumblebee that you are seeing. Bumblebees and honeybees are hugely affected because of human intervention. Increased usage of pesticides and herbicides has resulted in loss of their diversity, loss of their population, and this is why US was the first country who developed this red list for bumblebees. And this is also to let you know that when Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity started to develop the assessments for biodiversity and ecosystem services, pollinator diversity was the very first one. Why it is so important? Because every second bite that you take from your plate and eat to build your health actually comes from these pollinators. So these mighty pollinators, these are two of them, but there are a lot of birds, a lot of bats who actually pollinate the crops. So there is a forecasting that if all the pollinators from the world are gone, maybe in just 4 to 5 days, this entire planet will vanish. So this is the importance of these pollinators. And there was an assessment was released in 2015 on these pollinators. So there are more than 100 crop species which provide 90% of food worldwide, and they actually rely on pollinators. There is a huge global economic value of these pollinators, but they are seriously in decline because of neonicotinoid pesticides. There is this interesting study that I want to show you because this was the COVID time and there was a lot of studies that was coming up. So the one says that because of COVID-19 lockdown, there were honeybees that were starving, whereas the other study says that because of honeybee and reduced mobility of human beings because they were inside, a lot of vehicular pollution, a lot of agriculture and chemical pollution was reduced. Bees become very busy. They produced high quality, high quantity of honey due to lockdown. So there was this interesting news, and at the same time, some of the news were also on bees being starving. So this came from Zoological Surveys of India, and this was because a lot of flowers were not planted, maybe a lot of crops were not planted in the duration when actually pollinators needed this food. So when I talk about biodiversity, after giving you some example how they are beneficial, and I'm sure this can help you to relate. You know that the world has biodiversity, mega diversity centers. India is one of the mega diversity center of biodiversity. So if you see the biodiversity distribution in the world, there are temperate and polar latitudes and there are tropical latitudes. So actually to have more diversity, it needs greater solar energy, greater heat, humidity that actually supports growth of plants and animals. And this also gives you animals stable in climate to favor very specialist kind of species. So with together this all help in encouraging greater diversity of the species. Whereas if you see temperate and polar latitude, there are not very variable climate favors. Very few widespread and very generalistic species are present. That's why most of these species are their biodiversity is in the tropical latitudes. So this is one of the maps, global maps to show you the mega biodiversity countries of the world. If you see India, then China, the entire China and all those places, all these islands, then Australia, then some parts of Africa, then you see Madagascar, a larger part of South America and larger part of North America is where a lot of biodiversity lies. And these are the important countries, and India becomes one of them. If you see our country as a whole is a biodiversity because we have diverse agroclimatic zone and diverse biodiversity. So if you see the biodiversity hotspots in India, it is eastern Himalayas, it is western Ghats, then we have on neighboring Sri Lanka, then we have Indo-Burma, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia. They all are important biodiversity hotspots, and they have this huge tropical climate. So tropical climate is where a large biodiversity happens. It's not of only of plants and animals, it's of insects and a lot more examples that I'll share in my forthcoming slides. So India is among one of the 17 megadiversity nations. It has 7.8% of world's biodiversity in only 2.4% of the geographical area. So when I say biodiversity, it doesn't mean that if a country imports a lot of diverse plants and grows in their nation, it becomes a biodiversity country. It's very important to become, for being a mega diversity country, more than 50%, 70% of plants, animals, and whatsoever should be actually endemic in nature. Endemic means native in nature. So the native criteria is one of the important criteria for being a mega diversity country. And this is part of the world that includes wettest to driest region of the country on Earth. So we have the wettest region, we have the driest region, we have the mountain, we have the coast, we have the extreme tropic, we have the cloud forest, we have the rainforest. So we have very important and very good biodiversity across our nation. We have 16 major forest types, but that doesn't mean under these major 16 forest types, we have more than 220 sub-forest types. So that's the kind of diversity that we have in the country. And we have a total forest cover around 19 to 22%. Now showing you a map of the country that shows 10 important biogeographical zones of the country. So if you see right from the extreme north, we have Trans Himalayas, that's the cold desert. Then we have Himalayas, Western Himalayas, Eastern Himalayas, Central Himalayas. Then we have desert in Rajasthan. We have Thar, that is one of the biggest deserts. This is basically a biodiversity. I mean, the diversity in ecosystems, the biogeographic zone. We have semi-arid, we have Western Ghats, we have Deccan Peninsula. So I'm sure where you know where you lie. You lie somewhere. Andhra Pradesh is somewhere in Deccan Peninsula. We have the Gangetic Plain, and we have some coastal belt also in Andhra. In northeast regions, island. So a fantastic biodiversity hotspot that our country is. Now, when I talk about number of species, if you see, we have around 33% of endemic species in the country, and then we have 10.5% gymnosperms. So these are different lower plants and higher plants. So angiosperms are called the higher plants, gymnosperms are called the lower plants. When I say lower and higher, angiosperms one that produce flowers and seeds, and others are that doesn't produce any flowers and seeds. So this is one of the important diversity picture that I'm showing, and it looks very interesting. These are some of the insectivorous plants. So we have tropical pitcher plant in the Khasi Hills. It's one of the threatened plants. Then we have Venus fivetrap, we have water flea, wheel plant, we have Drosera, bladderwort, cobra leaf, a lot of important. And you see these are such important and at the same time very beautiful plants. So why they become insectivorous is because they grow on nitrogen deficient soil. So when they grow on nitrogen deficient soil, they have this scarcity of protein. They don't get enough protein for their growth. So for their nitrogen and protein requirement, they fulfill this nitrogen requirement from these small insects, flies, etc. So you can see this sundew plant capturing a small fly. So our biodiversity of the country doesn't end here. So here you might be knowing that in north and different parts of the country, we have diverse varieties of mangoes. So here I'm showing you one of the picture of one of the persons who have done important plant breeding experiments. So he is Padma Shri Haji Kalimullah Sahab. He lives in Malihabad in Lucknow, and what interesting task he has done. He has taken 300 diverse varieties of mangoes of the country, and he has actually drafted all of them on one single tree. So isn't it interesting? He might not be a scientist or agriculture or agronomist, but he has done what many agronomists just dream of. So drafting 300 varieties of mangoes in a single mango tree is indeed a very well appreciated work. Now, not limiting our biodiversity discussions to here, the kind of food that you eat. If we see India, we have n number of rice paddy varieties, we have n number of legume varieties, we have n number of biodegradable. I mean, you name them, we have them. So India subcontinent is home to more than 166 species of crops and 334 species of wild relatives of cultivated plants. Isn't it interesting that we have so much around? So why it is important to have to study wild relatives of cultivated plants? For example, the climate is changing. We know that a lot of our varieties might not be very successful in future that we are eating right now. So these wild relatives will help us to extract some gene or do some genetic manipulation, or maybe to use them as future crops of the world that are more climate resilient, more climate resistant, and can fulfill the food requirement of the world. So crop diversification is something that is very individual country characteristic. Our country, right from north to the south, we have a lot of climate adaptations that these small farmers, our indigenous and native farmers, have done to build up this crop diversity of the country. So this is another kind of example of diversity, biodiversity. Now India is also one of the second largest milk producer of the country, of the world. India has touched around 121.5 million ton during 2011, And right now, in last year, we have produced around 187 million metric ton in 2019. But you will be amazed to know that most of this good milk yield doesn't comes from imported variety of cow, but it comes from our indigenous breeds like Red Sindhi, Sahiwal, Halikar, Amrit Mahal, Red Sindhi, Khilari, and all those breeds. So the important thing is also to note that when white revolution started in the country, one of the arid zones of the country, Gujarat, was one of the foremost states. So that was the importance of indigenous breeds, indigenous biodiversity of cattle that helped the nation to achieve the targets of white revolution. So now coming and showing you some of the biodiversity examples of distribution of sheep breeds. So if you see, we have more than 40 varieties of indigenous native sheep varieties in the country. They are distributed all across, and I'm sure your state also gets featured somewhere where 29 and the 15 variety is also shown. That is very indigenous to Andhra Pradesh. So this 15th is Nellore variety of sheep that are very native to Andhra. And the important part is biodiversity doesn't restrict here. The kind of languages are also part of biodiversity. So showing you this important before this, I just showed you what kind of different diverse languages are in the country, but I'm showing what is the criteria of biodiversity. So here are the countries: Papua New Guinea, Nigeria, and Cameroon, where the highest cultural diversity happens. And then you have highest biological diversity: Colombia, China, Peru, Malaysia, Ecuador, and Madagascar. But if you see the countries who have the highest cultural and biological diversity, these are just 6 of them: Indonesia, India, Australia, Mexico, Zaire, and Brazil. So that shows that our country is one of the few countries where more than 200 languages are spoken. Then these are also the mega diversity countries. I'm sure showing you this interesting picture. Uh, can you guess why I'm showing you this neem? You call it, what do you call in your Telugu? So this, yeah, yeah. So this is basically the state tree of your state. It was for Andhra, but this and it is very beneficial, right from the wood to the leaves. It's antimicrobial. It has huge importance, and I'm sure flowers and seeds are also used for a variety of purpose. Similarly, this bird, if you can guess, being computer background is, I don't expect that you might get, but this is a very beautiful picture that you see extensively in central India, and this is the state bird of Andhra. It is Indian roller bird, and such a magnificent bird, and it is also being religiously considered very. I mean, it is also worshipped in a religious manner. And then water lily is the state flower of your state, and black book is the state animal. So that shows that government actually consider biodiversity, and these symbols are important. These symbols are to portray how important is biodiversity around you. But now coming to the ecosystem linkages, I'm showing you these important pictures. These are from northeast part of India, where we were doing an important NGT project that because of deforestation, because of rat hole mining in this area, what happened? If you see, these important forests are now converted into prairie-like grassland, but that is not the character of this region. Now even the rivers that are flowing here, because of acid mine drainage, have led to the pH of water being going up to 2.5 to 3. So this is the scenario that if you actually play with nature, if you destruct nature, the linkages are disbalanced and that harm human well-being. Mountain vegetation. So on one side you see these rugged mountains from Western Himalayas in Uttarakhand, and these mountains are from Nanda Devi Biosphere. That's the World Heritage Site. So this is a mighty area. And on the side I'm showing you one of the patches of Western Ghats. So both of them have a very important role to play. These ecosystems have very important role to play to reduce disaster risk give you pure environment, and also fulfill your provisioning demands. Then this is river Ganga, and if you see on both sides of the river, there are these important trees. So these trees are in the riparian forest, and they are actually important buffers to reduce any kind of pollutant to enter the river, and they also help in improving the water quality of the river. On the other side, if some of you might have visited, this is a very famous Nainital lake in Nainital. This is a high altitude wetland. But if you see the entire catchment area is being constructed, a lot of infrastructure has developed. So this actually reduces in the watershed benefits. So the water that should actually flow to the river because of concretization adversely affects the lake and also reduces the water quality. Coastal and hazard risk reduction I have talked about. So overall, if we see a much sophisticated understanding is demanded, and there is a need to understand contemporary terms of the subject with a more multidisciplinary task. So if I say that biodiversity is a topic that an ecologist or a biological scientist or a biotechnologist should, or a botanist or zoologist should study, it's not actually, because a lot of you are now studying computer science. I would be happy to share that a lot of our work is on collaborative modeling of these ecosystems to understand what are the plausible scenarios because of devastation, what in future, what kind of future scenarios will be there. So the need of understanding future scenarios is to start planning from the right stage of destruction. The second thing is I got to know that a lot of your students also study law. So environmental law is one of the very important disciplines that requires to be a new platform for students so that a lot of ecosystems around the world and across the country can be conserved. So the UN Millennium Assessment in 2005 and later on IPBES assessment found that biodiversity on the planet in last 50 years have been more rapid than ever before. And to support this, to support human food requirements, resilience to natural disasters, access to clean water, and biodiversity losses, we need to actually address these issues. So the biodiversity crisis, when we talk, the crisis is habitat loss, crisis is invasion of species. You might be knowing eucalyptus and babool are some of the invasive species. Overexploitation, our needs are developing, our needs are growing because our population is growing. So overexploitation, then man-animal conflict, then trafficking of a lot of animals and plants in trade. This all leads to overexploitation. Of course, climate change is the mega driver, and pollution, of course. So these are some of the reasons why biodiversity crisis is deepening. And this figure actually shows you the current global extinction risk in different plant species. You see that ferns and relatives, birds, they all are badly, I mean, there is a huge pressure on them, and then this shows that which of them are critically endangered. So when I say extinct in wild, that means there are no natives now available. So the cycad is a group that is extinct in the wild. So the only individuals that are present are in captivity. That means you might see these plants now only in gardens or somewhere in ex situ conservation. Then amphibian, a lot of amphibians are endangered. They are also critically endangered. So if we don't conserve them right away, there will be a fast depletion. Then a lot of these that have been mentioned in this figure, they all are basically critically endangered or vulnerable. So nature's decline and global goals. So when I talk about global goals, there have been sustainable development goal I talked in the very starting, and there are biodiversity goal, HE targets. So every decade there are new targets that are put up to reduce and halt biodiversity loss. So this year was a very crucial year because from 2010 to 2020, the HE targets were to be discussed, and the meeting was supposed to be in Kunming in China. CBD discussions, but because of COVID, the meeting has been indefinitely postponed. So protecting nature, we need to understand HE targets, Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Agreement. So one is about biodiversity, other is about sustainable development, and third is about climate change. This needs to be well addressed. So what is the loss? Hunting is one of them. Forest fires. You know that in India, a lot of fires happen every year before monsoon. And I must tell you, only 7% of forest fire in the country are natural. The rest of them are man-made fire. And they lead to not only devastation and destruction of forests, they also kill a lot of animals. You might be aware that Australia was burning last year badly, and how much of animals, the koalas and kangaroos were burnt. So this is crisis. Then of course, a lot of pollution, melting of icebergs and plastic pollution in marine area. Microplastic is a growing global threat of these important pollutants. Then of course, wildlife crime. You see and you hear that, and you might be traveling in your city where you see a lot of birds and animals are being sold on the roadways. So monkeys, rare parrots, live birds, falcons, they all fetch a huge amount of economy, and that's why there is a very much unorganized, illegal trade happening for these animals, where a lot of stakes are involved. A lot of reptile skins. There's a huge market of more than 10 million of dollars that are involved. Then a lot of butterflies from southern India are also traded. So these butterflies also are involved in illegal trade. So illegal trade is something that reduces a lot of threatened biodiversity. So not only butterflies, a lot of orchids are being sold, a lot of insects are being sold, and you might be knowing that in many Northeast Asian countries, these insects are being eaten. So they also lead to a lot of biodiversity loss. Then of course star tortoise and different kind of turtle eggs you might also see in the markets. So this lucrative trade of these charismatic species is leading to reduction of animals. Of course, marine areas where shark fins and sea horses are used for feed, food and different other purposes. And this is a new, in last few decades, there's a huge concern on Chinese manja that is being used that kills a lot of birds. And there is a lot of government involvement also now. They are urging people and especially students and children not to use, not to threaten these birds and not to use Chinese manja and other things. So this is one of the species of bird. This is Great Indian Bustard, and you might be really sad to know that there are less than 170 birds that are remaining in the wild in our country. So these are globally endangered: Bengal Florican, Lesser Florican, Great Indian Bustard, Social Lapwing, Jedang's cursor, and maybe if we don't protect them in next 2 to 3 years, we will have this bird even in the extinct category. So this slide shows you about birds that I am unable to show you the real pictures. These are now mostly in drawing because all of these birds are extinct from our planet. We don't have even a single individual surviving in the wild or even in captivity. So maybe dodo in Mauritius or Tasmanian, emu or Carolina, parakeet, Seychelles parakeet, ivory-billed woodpecker, New Zealand quail. These all have been sacrificed because of the human greed to use these animals for different purposes. So sustainable use of wild species is very important, and that's what ICBASE assessment is working on. How to reduce hunting, gathering, fishing, and non-extractive uses of animals. So when I say non-extractive uses, this is like there is now sudden urge of people to go in protected areas to see tiger, but this huge mob entering protected areas affects these free birds, free animals. Threat from invasion species, lantana, then you see your water bodies being exhausted by eichhornia or different kind of monoculture plants. This actually are affecting our ecosystem. So there is another assessment going on by Intergovernmental Panel on Invasive Species. So if you see this threat from invasive species, I see that your US and Australia have actually lower threat, and the reason are their biological policies are very strict. When you go to their countries on airports, you are rigorously checked for their biopolicy. So that's why these countries are really safe, because they don't allow any seed, even your food, your masalas or anything to enter in their country. So only strict policies and enforcement of transfer of biological material to the country can help to improve the combat capacity. If we don't have strict policies, we will not be able to combat, and the reason will be that these opportunistic, fast-growing, high biomass yielding species will actually replace our native species, and at the same time, these like lantana is leading to a lot of forest fires in many parts of the country. So these are a lot of adverse effects. So, covering and coming to some of the last concluding slides, I'd like to tell you that Convention on Biological Diversity came in 2002 that talks about three important principles. And for the students, it's very important to understand that this is the landmark convention that talks about conservation of biological diversity, that talks about sustainable use of species only to the extent that is required, while conserving the other for your forthcoming generation. And then equitable sharing of benefit. So when I say equitable sharing of benefit, that means if you are using the knowledge of local people, please share the benefits of monetary benefits, so that the rural poor who actually owns that knowledge also gets benefited for their livelihood. So these are the three important things that you need to remember: conservation, sustainable use, and equitable sharing. That are the foundation stones of this convention. Then Wildlife Protection Act 1972 in our country also have conserved a lot of areas under protected area network. So under protected area network, more than 5% of our country's land is having different kind of national parks or wildlife sanctuaries. So we have more than 103 national parks, we have more than 535 sanctuaries, we have conservation areas, we are now having community reserves where communities themselves are conserving these resources. So these are some of the examples of this national park. Banerghatta, Rajaji National Park. Maybe there might be a lot of national parks in your state as well. So these are basically to make sure that animals and plants are conserved, and that's why they don't allow any kind of human interventions or human interference in these landscapes. Then this was the important Aichi Nagoya outcome in 2020 that proposed 20 targets. So target where basically make people aware. The way I am giving you a lecture, this is an awareness lecture, so that students and everybody is aware why they should be aware, so that they should understand the value of nature. And when you understand the value of nature, you will understand how much has been lost, and then we can actually plan to restore. So the idea was that by 2030 we will restore whatever we have lost, but unfortunately we have not achieved any targets even in last 10 years. And based on understanding the crucial aspects of biodiversity loss, this intergovernmental panel was started sometime in 2013, and I have been lead author twice, and I'm very happy to share here that for this year Nobel Prize, this panel was also listed and nominated for Nobel Prize. We couldn't get it this year, but we are hopeful that in next coming year, I'm sure the duty and commitment and the hard work of thousands of lead authors will be recognized globally. So coming to one of the last slides, 2020 is a year of reflection, opportunity and option that shows you that why we need to understand biodiversity, why we need to value biodiversity, and why we need to conserve biodiversity. These are two animals in the picture who have been really been struggled because people have been saying that bat and pangolin were the reason why zoonotics have emerged. But at the same time, you should know that these poor animals never came out of this their forest of their own. It was human that brought them in other humans' contact and resulted in zoonotic. I would also like to share that every year almost five new viruses are discovered from wild, and at least one single virus has this capability to be a pandemic. So it is high time we understand that we need to reduce fragmentation and deforestation. There is a need to build back better, and it can only be done when we all are together. There is a need that ecological civilization is promoted. Even if you are living in urban area, it is important to acknowledge that nature around you is protected. There is some share of nature that is protected despite of having all kind of developments in the state. And before I end my slide, this is one of my last. This is the last slide, and this has been one of my favorite slides for last so many years. The reason is to put it here is to show you the beauty of nature-based solutions. So the gentleman here is no more. He is Dr. Dhruv Jyoti Ghosh. He was an engineer turned ecologist turned anthropologist. He was in Kolkata, and he got some of the best awards. And the lake that you see here, the wetland you see here, is East Kolkata wetland, and Kolkata is said to be one of the cheapest city of country because you get some of the cheapest breakfast and food here. And people think this is because of some policy of the political party, but unfortunately no. This is because of this nature's benefit of this lake. This lake, by using the algal, the nature-based solution, cleans the sewage of the city. At the same time, more than 10,000 tons of fishes are produced in this lake that go to the market because they don't have to pay extra money for traveling. So they reach the market, and that's why fishes are very cheap in Kolkata. And the second important thing is on the banks of this East Kolkata wetland, a lot of fresh vegetable is being cultivated. So, and this is one of the only Ramsar site. I'm sure you know what Ramsar site is. Ramsar is a wetland treaty that conserves this wetland as an international heritage. So this is the only man-made wetland that is also conserved as a heritage. So with this, I want to share the heritage and beauty and nature-based solution and importance of biodiversity and the deepening crisis that we have been seeing. With this, I come to my last slide. Thank you so much to all of you for inviting me, and I am really privileged to interact with all of you. And this beautiful picture is from one of our field sites in Himalayas. And you might see these poorest of poor people living in some of the most beautiful biodiverse landscapes of the country, and they're very happy. So happiness doesn't come from money, it comes from the satisfaction and being amid nature. Thank you so much. So in case you have questions, I'm happy to respond. Thank you, Dr. Rajesh and everybody there.
Rajesh sir, your mic, sir.
We have these national parks, wildlife sanctuaries to protect animals. But what about animals in sea? How do we protect those animals? Aquatic animals I'm talking about, so animals in the sea.
Thank you so much for this question. I think the idea of telling you about protected areas was that about India, but I mean, it is also very well acknowledged that Indian government has been concerned about marine national parks and even a lot of sanctuaries. So I give you example. A lot of coastal areas are having these marine national parks and sanctuaries. For example, Gujarat has a lot of marine national parks. Then your entire coastal belt is conserved, be it Bhitarkanika or your Park Bay or your Sundarban and your islands in Andaman and Nicobar. At the same time, most of these wetlands in the country, where you give the example of sanctuaries, most of these sanctuaries are conserved as bird sanctuaries because most of these freshwater wetlands are important places where migratory birds are coming. So when they conserve these freshwater lakes and rivers, they are actually having a protection on fishes and marine and other animals. So there are indeed a lot of protection on marine areas also. Why marine areas are important? It's also not because of we have native biodiversity there. There are a lot of transboundary movements happening. So if you talk about turtles or your dolphins or your whales, these animals are not only national property, they national heritage, they are also actually global heritage because these animals are moving from one country to other country boundaries. So there is a huge international legislation already in place. There is a huge national legislation already in place. For example, CITES is there or traffic is there, World WWF is there. So they all make sure that not only terrestrial areas, not only your landscape, but also your seascapes are protected, and so are the animals there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Sabil, any questions from student side?
Sabil sir, your mic.
Sorry for that. There are a few questions and I posted it in the chat box. So, madam,
You can read, madam can
okay.
listen.
Okay, then.
You can.
Respected madam, do you think that we are capable of coming together as on the issue of losing biodiversity?
I think this question is by Sahil. I think Sahil, this is a very important question from youngster. Are we capable of coming together on the issue of losing biodiversity? Yes, of course. And I should very much emphasize and let you know that in all the important international global conventions, be it climate change, be it biodiversity, there are huge youngsters participating in the negotiation. I mean, they part as observers. For example, if I say for biodiversity, GYBN is their Global Youth for Biodiversity Network. Then IUCN has their young team. So under 35 professionals and individuals are considered as young professionals. So these young professionals have good power. And because you all stand in the world where you are now entering your career, and biodiversity is a very interesting area to work. There is a huge momentum going on globally after Greta Thunberg came out in open and challenged politicians and discussions about climate change. So there is a lot of work already going. We are part of one of the agenda that maybe in next 2 months will be released globally on developing intergenerational partnership in sustainability. Unless two generations come together, because the generation that is working is fine, but for the future generation who are currently very young, it is very important to mainstream them. So youth mainstreaming is an important agenda. So I'm sure we all are capable, be it young or old, we all are capable of coming together on the issue of losing biodiversity. So can I read this question if you want?
Okay.
So there is this second question by Dave Rishik, who talks that ozone layer is healing in this quarantine period. You are right, Dave. The ozone layer is actually healing in this quarantine period. The reason is lot of industries were opened, but that was for a very short time of 2 to 3 months. Now we are getting back to business and people are avoiding to use public transport and mostly people are using their own commute. So that might enhance a lot of air pollution. But yes, it is true that ozone layer was healed during the quarantine period. The next question is by Sankalpa. When can we expect India to be a carbon neutral country? And what steps can we take to make our country free from carbon footprint? I think again a very important question, and coming from a youth is very important to note that they are thinking about these aspects. I think India has a very long way to go to become a carbon neutral country. we actually need, with the kind of population that we have and the growing demands for energy, it's really tough to say that when we will be carbon neutral. But with the generation of people like you, to reduce your carbon footprint is very necessary. And how we can reduce our carbon footprint is being energy efficient, uh, trying to use products that have small carbon footprint. If you are if you are purchasing your vegetable from a farmer that grows it very near, is better than actually buying vegetables from a big departmental store or a mall, because you are actually reducing your food miles as well. So food miles are very much something that are related with carbon footprint. So obviously, using energy less, using more local products can help you to become more carbon neutral. And of course, now people are shifting to solar. So having solar is also something that can help you. So it becomes on what kind of choices we are making. So if we are making better choices, and I'm sure during the lockdown, it was also a time of introspection when people started a lot of sustainable activities. I'm sure a lot of people purchased less clothes and went out less and didn't went for more food wastage. This is a kind of reducing your carbon footprint. So these choices should come from us, how every second day we can reduce our carbon footprint. There's another question, because all our world leaders are interested on furthering their political agenda and gaining more power. How do we appeal the importance of this issue to them to make a real change happen? I think change is happening. There was this Friday climate strike by Greta Thunberg, and in every small way, don't think that unless you shout on the roof, you're not heard. These small actions that you make are, maybe they are kind of inductive effect and can influence other people also. So I don't think our future leaders are only interested in furthering their political agenda. Slowly, environment is coming even in the political agenda. The example is of RA forest in Mumbai, where people came out and actually protected their entire forest. And similar was in our city also. There was this small Bharatvan in the heart of the city that was protected by local people. Now you see, even after Ganpati Visarjan and even Durga Visarjan, people come and clean their lakes because they know the harmful impact. So these are small kind of changes that are slowly taking place. So as Mahatma Gandhi said, change starts from us. It doesn't start from others, it starts from us. So if we want to make that change, we need to be really involved with it. So other question is by Arvind Rai. Though we speak about importance of diversity, but still countries are testing nuclear weapons in sea which harm ocean, wildlife. How we can keep this in check? I think it's a very broader question, Aryan. Of course, nuclear testing is something that all the countries condemn. At the same time, they do, and they do it in oceans, they do it in deserts, and of course, a lot of harm and wildlife damage happened. There was this treaty, CTBT, that was called Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, but unfortunately, in the power dynamics, everybody is doing that. So there is an international legislation already there, but depends how people are complying to that. Next question is anonymous. Why government is not implementing any ideas regarding agriculture-based cloud machines? So I'm sorry, I don't understand this question. Agriculture-based cloud machines, maybe because you are from computer background. Somebody else, teachers might answer these questions. Ma'am, why the world is not able to conserve the biodiversity, though we have a vast chain of technology? So actually, technology is not going to help conserve biodiversity. It has to be own efforts to conserve biodiversity. There is no technology that can conserve. The only way to conserve biodiversity is to reduce your technology dependence. I want to ask how adversely Internet and Electronics Department can help affect. I think this is a very interesting question, little tricky as well for me. How adversely Internet and Electronics Department can affect? Okay, So what I perceive, because we as scientists also are involved a lot of, not directly on internet and electronics, but yes, being in virtual world for last 7 months, I think we were gelled with computers and iPads and mobile for a very long time. And what it affected is taking our mental sanity at most of the time when we actually want to get out of this world, because there is this new term coming up, corona fatigue. And maybe if you are full time glued with your electronics and internet, you might be developing some kind of fatigue. So to come out of this fatigue, it is very important that we go meet our family or be in the natural surrounding. And we don't have nature around us. The only thing that we can do in terms of recreation is going, earning money and going in a mall and spending it. So how much satisfaction it gives you. So I think if you work in any department, nature lack of nature around will definitely affect your psychological benefit. And nature connectedness is something that is developing as a very important area of science. So every thing is connected. I connect here it as psychological benefits. Do cryptic species exist, or they are just a creation of our machine? I think it's more of a creation of our machine, though some species have been modified by genetic manipulation. But more or less, I think I personally would not appreciate having cryptic species or modified species, because if some of them really survive and do well, they might be threat to the native species. And that's why even many governments are not promoting hybrid this. I think there are a lot of questions, Dr. Rajesh. What I'll request you
Yeah,
to note
Madam,
down, send it to me so
yeah,
that I can personally answer to them.
it's okay, madam. We can stop here. Um, I'll give vote of thanks, and then we can conclude this presentation. Thank you, madam, first of all, accepting our invitation and giving such a wonderful lecture on biodiversity. You have well explained this importance of biodiversity in leading quality human life, and how biodiversity is helpful in managing the disaster management. And we have you discussed how mega diverse our country is. You said very well, you have well explained the cultural diversity and this biological diversity in India, and you have presented this how human activities are causing disturbance to this biological diversity. Thank you, madam, for giving such a wonderful lecture. I hope all the students have learned about biodiversity and what efforts we can put to protect our biodiversity. Thank you, Sabil, for arranging this talk, and Sir HOD, Sir, thank you for supporting us in organizing this lecture. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
thank you.